Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, Shane Beamer, South Carolina go on the road to Kentucky and absolutely run away with this football game. And I think this South Carolina defense is just kind of flying under the radar in the SEC. And you go back to how we talked about this South Carolina defense in the preseason. We wanted to see more pass rush, specifically from those edge rushers. It looked great against Old Dominion. I think our question was, can it look good against SEC opponents? We quickly got our answer. I mean, true freshman Dylan Stewart, it's about as impressive. You talk about guys like Jeremiah Smith and Cam Coleman at Auburn, all really impressive true freshmen. I think the most impressive true freshman we have seen all season so far is five-star edge rusher Dylan Stewart, immediately impacting this South Carolina team. Want to get into what we saw from not only the defense, but kind of some bright spots once they settled in on the offensive side of the football as well. Now, before we do, and as always, to the South Carolina fans, we talked about this game a couple of different times during the week. Y'all know I picked against South Carolina, went with Kentucky. A lot of you guys did as well in the comment section. Can't thank you guys enough for all the support. It's been a blast talking this program. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. But I think much more importantly, would love to hear how the South Carolina fans are feeling in the comment section. And Dill, without further ado, I'll give you the tee box here. Where do you want to go with this South Carolina performance?
I mean, it has to be their ability to get after the quarterback. I thought that was one of those missing links. I mean, we knew that interior was really, really good, but their ability with Kennard and Dylan Stewart to get after the passer. And I mean, they got Kentucky to the point where they simply couldn't pass the football. I mean, they were just like, all right, fine. We're just going to run it, try to cobble our way down the field. And that's kind of what they tried to do. But at the end of the day, when you're doing that or that effective on the pass rush, and you can make a team one-dimensional simply because their tackles can't really touch your defensive ends, I mean, you can get this type of result. And obviously, South Carolina really took it to it and pounded Kentucky into the ground.
So, I want to go back to how we talked about this South Carolina defense in the preseason. I believe the number was 13 quarterback hurries for the leading edge rusher for South Carolina all of 2023. I'm not positive. We got to see the official numbers when they come out Sunday morning. I think one of the two, Dylan Stewart or Kyle Kennard, might have already passed that number, and we're 2 weeks into the season. I think the biggest takeaway, though, especially with a guy like Dylan Stewart, one, like freaky flexibility around the edge, but he also has that speed to power. Like, he's a guy that, yes, I can win with my athleticism, beat tackles on the outside shoulder. Yeah, I can go right through an offensive tackle as well. And you rarely see true freshmen come into the SEC and immediately dominate along the line of scrimmage. That's exactly what we've seen from Dylan Stewart throughout the first two games. That's where it starts. And then you go back to the South Carolina secondary. They, kind of got it back.
They're getting their chance to take the ball away. That's kind of the thing. Like, we love what they have. Emlin is one of the best safeties, I think, in college football. You have guys like Kilgore and some corners who are good ball hawking players too, and they just didn't get put in great positions to be really, really effective in that zone defense they like to do. But if they're going to get after teams the way they're getting after teams right now, this team's going to have a zillion takeaways, I think.
Well, that's kind of what we said during the preseason was that, hey, the South Carolina defense in the secondary on paper wasn't great, right? You just look at passing yards given up last year per game. The number wasn't necessarily that surprising, but then when you go back into the South Carolina games in 2023, it had a lot more to do with just a lack of pass rush than it did from that secondary, at least in my opinion. Now, we know we got dudes on the inside that can pass rush. I mean, TJ Sanders continues to explode up NFL draft mock boards, but now you got dudes on the outside. I think that should fire up a lot of South Carolina fans. This looks like a defense that might be able to keep you in a lot of football games in the SEC. Now let's go to the offense. This was by far my biggest concern going into this football game. Was it didn't look great from LaNorris Sellers. It seemed like this offense was kind of one-dimensional. Now, what they did against Kentucky that stood out to me once they kind of settled into this football game, we are going to pass the football off of our running game. Like, this running game can be really good. I think the offensive line still has some growing up to do inherently when you bring in transfers, when you have true freshmen starting. As that offensive line continues to get better throughout the season.
Today, I thought that was pretty impressive. I mean, they weren't getting dominated by what I would say is a very, very good front. for that Kentucky team. I mean, they were able to put the ball on the ground and kind of move it. And they weren't like necessarily beating Kentucky up on that side of the ball, but they were doing their thing. They didn't have a ton of negative plays. They were running the ball pretty good, keeping that team on schedule. And then you had LaNorris Sellers playing a much more composed game. I mean, again, that one kind of snafu he had throwing that pick, obviously just a really bad overthrow. And certainly you can't have those going forward. But aside from that, I thought he played a really clean game where he wasn't making the mistakes. He was doing a good job managing the football game, and they were running the ball, I felt like, a lot better than I kind of expected they'd be.
And I think what I loved most about how South Carolina was operating on offense is, hey, we're going to get the run game going, and then we're going to work our passing game off of the run game. And you saw guys create a lot of separation because of that play action kind of concept working down the field. I mean, true freshman, I know Shane Beamer got a lot of hot seat conversations going into 2024.
Freshman are balling.
That's kind of what I said. I was like, I just hope Shane Beamer can kind of bring this unit together in 2024, because again, I think this team's going to be a lot better in 2025. And I'm not even kind of trying to look past 2024 because I think this team can win a lot of football games. But you look at the impact players for this South Carolina team, it's a lot of guys who are freshmen, sophomore, and juniors, particularly freshmen and sophomores. Now, Dill, the offensive line, I think has some figuring out to do if you want to beat some of the top teams in the SEC. But if you can get the run game going and take some pressure off this offensive line and pass protection, again, I only think this South Carolina offensive line just gets better week after week as these guys get more experience.
Well, because you're right. They got to pick up blitzes a little bit better. That was the one thing I thought you stuck out as like, oh, if that wasn't happening, obviously.
Two straight nickel pressures that they gave up clean.
You certainly need to pick up blitzes better, but at least like from a physical standpoint, I felt like that's kind of what you want to see. I thought, again, they weren't getting physically dominated by a team that I think is going to be a physical problem for a lot of offensive lines in the SEC. I mean, you look, Deion Walker, Weaver, those guys are like high level. Deion Walker, especially, he's one of the better defensive linemen I'd say in the country. So, again, for them to handle him, be able to kind of maintain their offense. Now, I certainly think there's room for this offense to grow. I'm not trying to get up here and pretend it was like they were lights out. That's not a 31-6 score because of the offense. That obviously had a lot more to do with the defense. But again, I thought you saw LaNorris Sellers play a much more composed game. He just looked comfortable. It didn't feel like he was making some of those really like deer in headlights kind of plays. It's like when he had guys open, he was hitting them. When he was asked to like move the pocket and get outside, he was doing it and he looked comfortable. He wasn't taking sacks. So I think there was a lot of building in his game, but I also think, again, their ability to run the ball for a pretty good average with their running backs per carry, I think was very.
And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway is there's a lot of building to be done, but there's reason to believe this South Carolina team can get to work building because it's young. It's a lot of new faces in this starting lineup on both sides of the football. Particularly,
I wasn't ready to write him off against that Old Dominion game, but like after seeing it, it's like, oh, this offense still kind of looks very similar to what it was last year. I thought the offensive line struggled. They didn't run the ball particularly physically for the most part of that game. And then Sellers, I thought, really kind of disappointed. He
100%.
had a bounce back football. I thought he played really well.
Yeah, it's good to see a lot of playmakers getting the football in space as well for South Carolina's offense. I'm encouraged. And again, I think this South Carolina defense can have a massive impact on this football game. And I'm not going to go around comparing South Carolina to Michigan last year, but that is kind of how it looked, right? When you have a defense that can help your offense and create some turnovers and get some 3-and-outs and control the field position, that complementary football is going to win you a lot of football games. And as this South Carolina offense continues to kind of get their feet wet, like there's a lot of reason this South Carolina team can build on what was an extremely impressive. I was high on Kentucky heading in, and I'm not necessarily selling my stock on Kentucky, but this South Carolina performance really impressive.
I thought the ability to physically beat up Kentucky, because I even thought last year South Carolina felt like at times they'd play good finesse football on the defensive side of the ball and get good moments where they'd make some like plays, but their ability to down in, down out, just kind of beat that Kentucky team up. I was really impressed with Jules DeAndre. He's a guy who, again,
DeAndre Jules, dude.
DeAndre Jules, sorry. But I was really impressed with his game. I thought he kind of played that physical, tough style of football you wanted, along with some of that playmaking. So again, building up the depth through that defensive line, being able to be just generically, I think, more physical. That's a really dangerous South Carolina defense, I should say.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun team to watch. They're going to get better. We'll cut it there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Would love to hear how you guys are feeling in the comment section, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.